Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Dr. Rima Truth Reports for January 2nd, 2014. This is Dr. Rima's co-host, Ralph Fusatola. I have with me this evening Dr. Theirry Vrain, a scientist from the far west of Canada, is going to be talking with us about a number of important issues. Those issues include Dr. Rima Lebo and General Bert Stubblebine are interested in for the Natural Solutions Foundation. Dr. Rima and General Bert can't be with us this evening, so I'm standing in for them. They are right now in the deep south, deep south of Chile, that is, some 12 hours south of Santiago de Chile, where they live, at a facility that they're looking at as a possible location for the Dr. Rima Institute, which will be located in the deep south, perhaps not that far deep, but 12 hours south of Santiago is a wonderful country, magnificent mountains, not magnificent internet connection. And so at this moment, unless Dr. Rima and General Bert call in on a landline, which they may do during the program, I will be here with our guest. Very happy to have him with us, and has an interesting background, and he is a former research scientist for Agriculture Canada. And so what I'd like to do is start with a discussion of your background and your interests in this area. You know, Dr. Theirry, do you want to give us a little bit about your background, why you're with us? And I've even got a few questions that Dr. Rima sent by Skype. So let us know about you, please.
Okay. I'm quite pleased to be with you tonight on the show. Background, you're going to have to ask me precise questions. If you ask me a big, long, general question, I'm not sure where to turn. My background is I came from France. I came from France to Canada when I was 25 years old. I was teaching at Université du Québec in Montreal for a couple of years in Montreal. Then I went to the US to get a PhD in plant pathology, and I became a soil biologist. I was specialized in nematodes and nematology. Then I came back to Canada, and I was hired by Agriculture Canada, and I was then a research scientist for basically all of my career for the next 30 years. And I worked at 3 research centers, Research Institute for Agriculture Canada, one near Montreal, one in Vancouver at the University of British Columbia. And then I moved and finished my career for the next 7 years in the Okanagan Valley in Summerland, where they have a big research center there.
Can you tell us, for those of us who are not Canadians, what is the role of Agriculture Canada? I know a little bit about Health Canada. What about agriculture?
Yeah. Agriculture Canada is basically the equivalent of the USDA in the USA. Mm-hmm. It's the Department of Agriculture. So they do everything. They do the overseeing the production. They do overseeing the quarantine and the regulations, and that's CFIA. That's the Canadian Inspection Agency. And then they also have a network of research centers. They have about 20 research centers all over the agricultural areas of Canada. Okay.
Indeed. All right. That's a very interesting background beginning, and I appreciate it. Let's see. One of the things we don't ever want on the air is dead time. And so what I'd like to do is look for Dr. Rima's message to me. We're working on a little bit of an issue of what's called latency. There's a little bit of a lag in our computer activity tonight. And so I'm hoping that we're not going to have any problems with dropping calls or with gaps between our discussion. No, that's just a local recording.
I got you.
All right, so that's going to be okay. I have my computer expert here with me, my son Drew, and it should be okay because we have Skype on and we're just recording what we're doing. All right, some of these technological issues are beyond my pay grade, but I'm always trying to learn more. It has been an amazing, of course, like yourself, I've had a long career. I practiced law for 36 years, representing a lot of people in the health field and the vitamin field, a lot of what I like to call advanced healthcare practitioners, also working with people in the agricultural world. I work with, for example, here in the United States with several groups of Amish who are very interested in protecting their natural agriculture. And I also work with, of course, our Natural Solutions Foundation, which actually has an all organic, recently certified organic coffee farm in the highlands of Panama that we developed specifically to help people learn about more natural approaches to growing things. We decided that one of the best demonstrations that we could give as a foundation to the population of any given area would be how to grow things in a more natural manner, and perhaps a manner which would be friendlier to, as we like to say, friendly food. Friendly to the workers, friendly to the land, and friendly to the consumers. And so
Yes.
we found a coffee farm that had been abandoned by its owner. It was up in the cool highlands, an area that grows magnificent coffee, some of the world's best coffee. And yet this particular property, the owner could not borrow enough money to buy enough fungicide to bring out a crop. And so the land was abandoned. And Dr. Rima said, and as she would say if she were here right now, Dr. Rima said, fungi aren't smart enough to know the difference between people and plants. So let's treat this land and these plants just the way we would treat a person who had a fungal infection, with probiotics, with nutrition, and with attention, loving care. And so we went to the muchachos, the gentlemen who worked the land, and we said, we're going to change the way things are done on this land now that it's going to come back into production. No more pesticides, no more herbicides, no more fungicides. If we have to keep the herbs down, the plants down, the weeds, then you're going to have to use your machetes. We're going to approach it differently. We were told, it'll take you 3 or 4 years to even get one crop out of that land. It's not going to happen very easily. And it wasn't very easy. But Dr. Rima concocted some interesting things. And the first year, we got 7,000 pounds of coffee off the 20 acres that were planted. And in the second year, 15,000 pounds. And in the third year, 25,000 pounds. And we're zipping along at about that rate right now with some really magnificent, obviously completely toxin-free coffee, which people, by the way, can have access to if they'd like by going to our Valley of the Moon coffee.com website. That's www.valleyofthemooncoffee.com. And of course, in this particular website, we have a wonderful video of our recent trip to Panama. Back in July, we went to inspect the finca, look at the new buildings that have been put there, and we wanted to check and make sure that the solar panel was working and that sort of thing. So we have a video on the website at valleyofthemooncoffee.com. But the purpose behind all of this was to show people in that part of the world that it is possible to grow the money crop. It is possible to grow the money crop. And it is possible to do so in a way that is friendly, as I said, to the land, to the workers, and to the consumers. We were told by the people working there after the first year that this was amazing, they said. This is the first place we've worked where we and our children have not been sick all during the spraying season. So while you were experimenting and watching what was happening in the world in agriculture, we've also been doing some work in that area. I'm sure not on the level that you did it. We were just experimenting a bit and ended up with some really good coffee. But that's the background that we bring to this discussion. And if Dr. Rima and General Burt were here, they would, I am sure, appreciate what you're having to say. Now, it looks like our guest may be disconnected.
No. Yeah, sorry, Theirry.
All right. Kat, if you're still with us, we're having connection problems. I should notice to everyone that we are having a northeaster right now in the Northeast. And the snow is coming down heavily, probably at a clip of about an inch an hour right now. So there may be some internet connection problems going on, but that's okay. Dr. Vrain, are you back with us?
I'm still here.
Oh, very good. It looked as though you might have been disconnected for a moment.
We were disconnected.
We were. Well, as I said, up here in the Northeast, we are having our first Northeaster snowstorm, and so I may get some glitches with my connection to the internet as well. One of the drawbacks of living in the woods, but it is more than offset by all the positive parts of that process. So we were just finishing up. I was finishing up talking about our coffee farm. I love the place.
Yes.
And then I was going to ask you, to tell us really about the core of the issue that we're coming to talk to you about this evening, and that is genetically modified organisms and the distinction between normal horticultural practices that result in changes in species and what we call genetic modification. These are topics that our audience is very interested in learning about. So let me be quiet a bit and please share with us what you've learned in your illustrious career.
My goodness, where do I start? Genetic modification is basically a way for us to change living organism, be they plant or animals or other organisms. I mean, we started with the bacteria.
Mm-hmm.
And it is based basically on the way that bacteria exchange genetic material. When bacteria want to exchange genetic material, they come close to each other and they just pass their genes on to one another. They just share. It's called direct gene transfer. But of course, the plants and the animals have evolved from the bacteria, and they have invented a completely different way of doing that. They've invented sex. And I'm currently on a speaking tour across Canada and possibly in the USA as well. But I explain to people, and of course I get a lot of chuckles as soon as I talk about sex.
Mm-hmm.
But I say, look, if we are all in this room here, we are all bacteria, and I've had this amazing mutation, and you're all looking at me, and you want me to share, and so I come next to you and we share. But because since we have become humans and animals or plants, you can't do that anymore. You get your genes from your parents, and you give them to your children, and that's called sex.
Right.
You cannot share your genes with next to you.
It is so important. The point you're raising is so very important about the distinction between the biota, the bacterial portion of living material on this planet, which is the majority of the living material on the planet, and us multi-celled animals. And that distinction is that, yes, bacteria do regularly and ordinarily trade DNA. It's a way of communicating, isn't it?
Yeah, that's very, very normal for them. They do that all the time, and that's why they evolve. And we all know about antibiotic resistance in building up in bacteria, and of course, that's how it happens. But it's very important for people to understand that the gene modification, when we talk about genetic engineering, it is based on what bacteria do, and we are using this technology based on what bacteria do, and we are basically forcing it into the plants and the animals, and there is collateral damage, and there are consequences to that.
That's interesting. Collateral damage. So is that a phrase that people in the genetically modified organism business might use to describe what happens?
No, I made it up, but it's very.
It's very telling point.
It applies really. You're basically forcing bacterial genes, because that's what we're working with so far, yes. Only bacterial genes. You're forcing bacterial genes into a plant, and the bacterial genes basically are now inside the chromosome of the plant and looking around and saying, well, where are we? This is not our normal surrounding, and there is collateral damage because of that.
Indeed, the species, the creature that comes out at the other end, if you will, is no longer a creature with normal DNA content, but rather is a creature that is really a chimera, a mixture of more than one species in one body.
Ralph, you're breaking up, and I
I'm
can't
so
hear
sorry
what you
about
said.
that. Excuse me. As I was saying, the type of creature that results from these sort of experiments are basically chimera. They are creatures that have the DNA of more than one species mixed into their bodies. They're like the beasts of mythology, if you will. And that's very interesting. My understanding, and it would help our audience too, if you could help me understand it, is that a lot of the modifications that are being put into the plants are specifically to allow the plants to survive in a very high pesticide, herbicide, and fungicide environment.
Oh, no. It's not as complicated as that. It's very simple.
Tell.
Yeah, I will tell you why it's so simple. Basically, there is one very large chemical company that's involved.
Yes.
Monsanto, of course.
Of course.
And we have about 500 million acres of engineered crops. 500 million acres of engineered crops on the planet. 90% of all those crops, 90% of all the plants that are engineered to tolerate, to resist the herbicide Roundup. So it's not a question of fungicide, it's not a question of pesticide, or it's not complicated at all. It's one chemical. One.
Now, why do the plants need to be made especially impervious to this particular chemical?
Because it allows. No, it's really a very simple story. This chemical Roundup, the herbicide Roundup, was invented in 1964 as a chelating agent, as a chelator. You probably know what that is, but maybe your audience doesn't. But we'll come back to that.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was shown that it was a herbicide. It was a strong herbicide, very broad spectrum herbicide. 1970, the patent for herbicide, and that's when Monsanto bought the patent and started commercializing this amazing product. And it's been an incredible success story. And they were going to lose their patent by the year 1990, 20 years later.
That's interesting. All right. So now they're faced with the possibility of losing their patent, and they have to do something about that. Yes.
They came up with this amazing strategy where they could engineer the plant. That was just the beginning of the engineering technology at the time. They could engineer the crops to tolerate the herbicide. If they could find bacteria that could not be killed by the herbicide and find the gene, the protein, the mutation that made the bacteria resistant, and transfer that to the plant, then the plant became resistant to the herbicide. If the crop, let's talk about corn since that was the first crop, that if corn has become resistant to the herbicide, that means that you don't need to worry about the weeds anymore. And that is the incredible success of the technology, of the genetic engineering technology. I call it the gene revolution. If you can, for the farmers, weed management is the most important preoccupation. Weed management is the headache of the farmers. Weeds are overwhelming. Weeds are everywhere. They eat your yields if you don't have the proper weed control. And here comes this amazing technology, this chemical company.
Dr. Vrain, are you with us? I think we've lost a little bit again in our. There we go. You're back on.
When your crop has come up, you spray, and the magic happens. And the magic is that all the weeds disappear. It's magic. It's all the weeds are gone, and your crop is there. The farmers absolutely love it.
Yes,
for the farmers, it's an amazing technology. And if you're a farmer today and you are not using this technology, you're back in medieval times.
But this is not applied to every type of plant. Essentially, what you're describing is something that's applied to the huge monocultures, corn, soybeans, wheat, those types of food that are grown on many thousands of acres. In fact, hundreds and thousands of square miles, with the same type of plant, the same Monsanto resistant genetically modified plant. And isn't it true that in the summer of 2011, I believe it was, I don't think it was 12, I think it was 11, that same monoculture plant base, mostly in the soy and corn, suffered greatly, a 20% reduction in production or something in that order, because of a slight drought. That in fact, relying heavily on a single strain of genetically modified plant actually puts our food supply at risk of a catastrophic collapse. Just as we're seeing a catastrophic collapse of the bee population, possibly in reaction to these genetically modified organisms, we may also at some point find ourselves with an unexpected stressor on the corn crop, we'll say, and find a collapse of the corn crop throughout the United States and Canada, and that would have horrendous effects on the world food supply. Is there anyone in the GMO scientific community concerned about issues like that?
A lot of people are concerned about this. Yes, it is definitely a question mark, and it's not a good idea. I mean, all the biologists are in agreement. It's not a good idea to reduce biodiversity, and I'm not talking of all the wild species and all the wild animals, etc. We're talking agriculture here. So if in agriculture you have like 5...
Dr. Vrain, I just lost your audio feed. If in agriculture, and then we lost you.
But right now,
Good.
The whole system of agriculture is based on this monoculture. We are definitely extremely vulnerable to an epidemic.
Indeed. We're losing you again, but I understand very clearly what you're saying, Dr. Vrain. We are literally at risk. There we go.
A drought comes by, then of course we're very vulnerable.
That's true. And what percentage, can you tell us in general, what percentage of the corn crop in the United States and Canada is genetically modified? And is that mostly corn to be used for feed and for fuel?
Ralph, you were broken up.
I broke up again. Question. Yeah, you had broken up. Come on, let me give you that question again. Can you help us? Because I think it would help our listeners. Let us understand the percentages involved. What percentage of the corn crop is genetically modified? And is it only the corn crop being used for the purpose of feeding animals or making fuel, or is it also the corn crop that we eat as a regular vegetable?
The sweet corn,
right,
is the vegetable. Sweet corn is engineered, yes.
And also, I assume that the corn used for both fuel and animal feed is also.
Almost 90% of the corn is engineered.
Got it.
No, there's no doubt. I'm telling you, the technology is an incredible success.
Right.
As far as the chemical company is concerned,
right.
90% of corn is engineered. Way over 90% of soybean is engineered. Same thing with cotton. Same thing with canola. 100% of sugar beet is engineered.
Wow.
All the sugar in the store.
That's extraordinary.
From engineered plants.
And this has all happened over the past decade?
This has happened over the past 18 years.
18 years.
Yeah, 1996.
Right. Because we see in the news media discussion of opposition of various countries rejecting GMO, and it seems to be happening with greater rapidity in the past couple of years. But so the technology caught on, became dominant in many areas and is now being resisted in some countries. Is that a fair analysis of what's happening?
Well, when I go around on my speaking tour and
Yes.
I have a presentation and I show a slide with a picture of the world, basically of all the countries of the world, and it said 64 countries of the world.
Yes. Oh, Dr. Vrain, I think we lost you again. It looks like the connections between the east coast of the United States and the west coast of Canada are not. There we go.
Genetically modified food like India or
Yes.
China
Yes.
or Brazil are regulating the food. They don't want to eat it.
I know actually in Chile, where Dr. Rima and General Burt live, we have the same situation where they are allowed to grow genetically modified crops to produce seeds to sell in other countries, but they don't produce genetically modified crops for the use of people in Chile. So,
Yes.
that certainly is an experience that we've had. And you will, of course, appreciate that UPOV, the international regime for the protection of intellectual property in seeds, is involved in this as well. And this past year, Natural Solutions Foundation was very deeply involved in the issue of UPOV in Chile, where the Chilean government was being asked to go from UPOV 78 to UPOV 91. Let me explain that for our listeners. As I said, UPOV is an international legal regime for the purpose of protecting intellectual property in seeds. UPOV 78 was the 1978 version of that, which many people who are expert in the field, which does not include me, believe is much less onerous to heritage seeds and organic seeds. UPOV 91, which is the 1991 version, and the current version that's adopted in the large Western countries such as the United States, that particular version is not very friendly to seed saving and similar behavior. So it was a very big issue. And as usual in these matters, it only comes to our attention when the horse is almost out of the barn. And in this case, the Assembly of Chile had adopted UPOV 91, but the Senate of the Republic had not. And indeed, by not adopting it, it gave us an opportunity. And for the first time in Chilean political history, millions of people. Yes, there you go. For the first time in Chilean history, literally millions of messages, of emails, were sent to the members of the Chilean Senate regarding this issue of UPOV 91, and the Senate has refused to adopt the new regime. So the issue of seed saving is part of this. In the United States, there are many people who are very concerned about their legal ability to grow their own plants in their own front yards and backyards. There have been some instances recently in the United States where various cooperative growing organizations and similar groups found themselves being raided by state or federal food agencies. And so this has become a very hot political issue in the U.S. and in other countries. So we're very appreciative of the fact that you are bringing to this discussion literally decades of knowledge of this field. And I just, I want to be quiet and listen. I want to learn what I can of what you said is a miracle with great risk. I guess we should talk about the precautionary principle at this point, and about how scientists like yourself who are working with these materials, how do they deal with it? What are they concerned about? Are they concerned about an uncontrollable modified organism being released on the world? What can you tell us about those issues?
Oh, yeah. I don't know if scientists are concerned. I was just talking with somebody else this evening saying, basically, most of the scientists, almost all of the scientists who are working in this field, in biotechnology, are feeding at the trough. They're basically getting grants and money from funding from the corporations or even governments, but the governments are bought by this big corporation.
Yes.
I don't see very many scientists, very few scientists who are getting involved in this and speaking up. It's a bit of a shame.
Indeed. Let me go on to the questions that Dr. Rima Skyped over to me earlier today. She had a number. She really is disappointed that she was not able to be with us this evening. Here on the Dr. Rima Truth Reports on Revolution Radio, which is, of course, listened to over www.freedomslips.com. We're on Studio B, where we are every Thursday night from 10 to midnight East Coast time, which is a little later than Santiago de Chile time and a lot earlier than the time where you are on the west coast of Canada. Her questions, I think, fit in at this moment. She begins by making an assumption that you've, because of the positions you've taken and because of the speaking tours you're on and the other issues involved, and because of the quotation that we've seen that explains your position, that you've split with, if you will, some of the other scientists in this area. And so her first question for tonight is, what made the difference for you? What did your former colleagues say when you started to publicly question the effects of genetically modified organisms?
Ralph, you were breaking up. I didn't hear your question.
All right, let's repeat that again. What made the difference for you? You've obviously, from your statements, have made a break with the accepted wisdom, if you will, in this area.
Yes. I would not call it wisdom. The difference, I was a soil biologist, and then the last 10 or 12 years of my career, I was a genetic engineer, and I retired 11 years ago. And
Dr. Vrain, I'm afraid that our audio has just stopped.
We're having really bad connection.
Really bad because of the storm. Yeah, Dr. Vrain, you were just interrupted, unfortunately, by another glitch. I do have to apologize for the snowstorm, and you were just saying to us 11 years ago.
11 years ago, I retired.
Okay.
And I was basically the spokesman.
Oh my. I don't know what to do.
I know.
Technology in general and about genetic engineering. And my reality at the time was that, of course, I espoused the amazing power of the technology. We were going to do great things. And that was definitely the plan 20, 30 years ago when we started. Now, in the last, since I retired, in the last few years, I have basically been more free to read more widely and to be more interested into the opposition, so to speak. And so I read a lot of research studies done mostly in Europe. They're not mostly not in North America, and basically the Europeans and many other countries in the world are looking at these studies done, and they show serious concern. They show organ damage in the animal. In the study, we do feeding studies with rats in the labs.
Right.
And when you come up after 4 months of feeding the rats, you come up with organ damage, like kidney and liver and many other organs are damaged. You kind of shake your head and say, there is something wrong with this technology here.
It's my understanding that the original studies that were done were limited to 90 days, and not much damage seemed to show up. But when those same studies were replicated years later with the same strain of rats, same food, but carried on for the entire life cycle of the test subjects, that's when the very serious effects started to show up. Is that your understanding of the of what's happened?
there's many studies that have been done. You know, there's many studies done by industry that are paid for by industry. The corporation, the chemical corporation, don't really do their own work. They just give money to the academics who are very happy to take the money and run the studies as necessary and publish if they can. And it's very obvious that all those studies done by
Dr. Vrain, we just lost you again. You were just telling us what happened, what the effect of those studies were.
You really have to appreciate that 3 months of the life of a rat is about equivalent to 10 years of a human being.
Ah.
Yes. So that's very important. So what that means that basically if we look at what happens in those feeding studies with lab rats.
Yes. Oh, I'm so sorry. You're breaking up badly. You're just about to tell us some very important information about the feeding.
Vrain for 10 years before they were really, really sick. But that doesn't mean that they don't get sick before that.
Aha. That's a very key issue. And
Yes.
Of course, how do we extrapolate that to human beings? At what point would we begin to notice in the medical literature or in the medical statistics that's happening?
There is no studies. There are no studies done. No epidemiological studies. No follow-up. There is no knowing who is eating what because there's no labeling. There's no way. There's no way. You cannot do a feeding studies on human beings when you think if you think that there's.
You cannot do a feeding study on human beings. Obviously, there are ethical reasons why that can't be done. There are
listeners to go there. There is a paper that was published by a doctor in Seattle. It's Dr. Swanson, Swanson. Now, this person went to the CDC, the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked them for their statistics because this is all public statistics.
Exactly.
It's available.
Mm-hmm.
And so she asked them to provide the number of cases that were hospitalized, number of people that were hospitalized this year in the USA for kidney disease or for liver damage or for autism or thyroid cancer or diabetes, all kinds of degenerative diseases that we have seen become epidemic in the last 20 years.
Indeed, those same diseases were identified by the World Health Organization and the FAO back in 2002 as the preventable, non-communicable diseases of mal and undernutrition. And they are, of course, diabetes, cancer, heart disease, obesity. There are a few others. But yes, absolutely correct, sir, in that point. Please continue. This is fascinating.
Now, the very interesting point here with these correlation curves is that she plotted.
Dr. Vrain, we're losing you again, and you're giving us the most important information we could have. Dr. Vrain, we just lost you for about 15 seconds, and I must say that sometimes it happens with our connections, especially on bad nights, and other times we find that we get interfered with when guests are telling us inconvenient truths. And you're just telling us now, and please go back to that point and repeat what you were saying.
Okay, I'm losing you here and there.
I understand that. Yep, we're getting it on both ends. Yep.
What I was saying is that Dr. Swanson made a correlation, or a whole series of correlation graphs where she plotted the number of cases of that have been diagnosticated for.
That's very interesting. At the very moment that Dr. Vrain is going to explain to us what
numbers against the volume of Roundup that had been sprayed in the U.S., that had been sold in the U.S. and
My. The level of interference is quite amazing, folks. Dr. Vrain.
Start climbing very fast in the last few years.
Dr. Vrain, again, over the past minute, as you explained what the graphs showed, we lost you exactly as you were at the most critical moment. And this is, folks, a critical point. This is literally a statistical study that takes the entire population, in this case of the United States, and looks at it and looks at its diseases. Go ahead. Please repeat.
Yeah, the number that she obtained from the CDC. And she plotted those numbers against the volume of Roundup, the herbicide Roundup, sprayed on corn and soy in the USA. And these are the curves that she obtains.
Yes.
And these are very interesting curves. These are correlation curves. And they are basically flat, in the early 1990s. And then they start climbing, and they climb very fast in the year 2000. And they start climbing in the mid-1990s, 1996, when Roundup became so popular with the explosion of genetically engineered.
Yes. So there's a direct correlation or relationship between the use of these pesticides and the magnificent... And it's the increase in the use of the pesticides that was made possible by the use of the genetically modified plants that allowed the dramatic increase in the dose, if you will, of these pesticides that were being used on the land. And now we see related statistically to that an increase in disease. Can you tell us? You say that the study plotted various diseases. Can you give us any examples of specific diseases that seem to be correlated? Nope, I think we may have lost Dr. Vrain again.
No,
we haven't. Okay, you're thinking about it. All right, well.
I heard you say, can you tell us? And then you were gone.
Aha. Well, that's interesting. One thing you could tell us, do you have a website you can direct us to where you have some of this information posted so that people can follow up, because it is such an important issue and we want to have access to those studies?
Okay. I don't have a website, but I'm going to direct you to another website.
Please.
I'm going to direct you to a website called Earth Open Source.
Okay.
Earth Open Source.
Got it.
.org.
Got it. All right. And you will find some of that information there?
If you go to earthopensource.org, there is a document there called GMO, Myth and Truth.
Got it.
And you can download this document for free.
Very good. And this is going to give us some of these statistics that you've been discussing.
No, this is this document, GMO Myth and Truth, is now a year old, and these curves that I just mentioned to you are just 3 or 4 months old.
So can you again repeat for us the name of the scientist who did this research, so I can put it on I can post it, so that people will be able to look for it again.
The scientist is called Dr. Swanson, Swanson.
Okay, and it was published.
I'm sorry?
And you know the journal it was published in by any chance?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay.
You'll have to do a bit of research.
That's no problem. Statistical study.
But I do want to point the GMO Myth and Truth, because this is definitely something that I want your listeners to go to. To go to earthopensource.org and download GMO Myth and Truth. It is the most interesting document.
Very interesting, yes. Well, these are exactly the sort of issues that we are most concerned with. These are key issues.
Yes.
How do we get more basic than the food that we eat? And of course, when we talk about genetic drift and pesticide drift, for example, even the air we breathe and the very land that we grow our own products on, people who want to be locavores, eat only local food and grow their own, find themselves having to face a continent that seems to be, which many thousands of tons of these substances are being spread annually. So, as you say, the great success of Monsanto has also been the great threat. And we have to acknowledge that that on certain levels there have been great successes. The horrid famines, for example, that humanity faced half a century ago and more, seem to be a thing of the past. And the only famines that seem to happen now are politically instigated in various ways. And that certainly is probably, to a great extent, part of the Green Revolution, as they called it. And I suspect GMOs are part of the Green Revolution, but not the only part of it. And so we have to acknowledge that that the people who worked in these fields, like yourself, were trying to do the right thing. We're trying to do things that would use science for the benefit of humanity. But of course, in that enthusiasm, we end up in a situation where there are great unaddressed risks. And so that's really the situation we're facing in the European tradition. That's called the precautionary principle, the concern for putting anything into the stream of commerce before it has been thoroughly and carefully vetted. Here in the United States and other common law countries like Canada, we have a slightly different set of principles that ought to apply. But in our legal system, the concept is what's called strict liability and tort. If you put something into commerce, such as genetically modified plants, you bear the responsibility of any damages that what you've put into commerce causes. Now, that's not the way it's been working out legally in the United States, especially where the special political clout of companies like Monsanto have gotten them special political treatment. And so for a while there was case after case where American farmers and Canadian farmers, for that matter, were being accused of robbing Monsanto of its genetic property because either the farmer intentionally saved seeds that were genetically modified seeds and therefore patented, or those seeds accidentally got on the farmer's property. Indeed, back to the issue of genetic drift. In recent years, however, there's been a shift in the courts a bit, and they've begun to realize that the farmers are not stealing from the companies like Monsanto. Rather, companies like Monsanto are trespassing on the innocent farmers, especially organic farmers, where the greatest success has been. And so from my viewpoint, looking at it from a legal standpoint, these issues are now just getting into the court system in a meaningful way. And so the facts that you bring to us, the work that Dr. Swanson has done, the information that you bring in your speaking tours, are especially important now that the courts are beginning to pay attention to this whole issue. And so I find this absolutely fascinating. I want to learn more, and I'm sure that you have more to tell us. And indeed, Dr. Rima has more questions that she had sent us. So what I'd like to do is open up my list of Dr. Rima questions. We only did the first one, which was what made the difference for you when you retired? You began to read, and that's powerful. What did your former colleagues say when you started speaking out and raising questions? Did you hear anything from your former colleagues? Have any of them joined you in this process of revealing truth?
No.
No.
No, absolutely not. No, I didn't even contact any of my former colleagues. I have had, a few comments. Basically, I don't know. They probably think I'm just being funny. I'm so far gone. I'm so on the edge compared to where they are. Like I said, it's the paradigm. It's the dogma. When you're in. I call it the biotech bubble. When you're in the bubble, you can't even imagine there's anything else. So basically, doing what I'm doing, I have become an activist. I'm not even a scientist anymore.
Right. Well, Dr. Rima has said that to us as well about the medical profession, that the doctors are basically trained to think a certain way, and they're within that bubble, as you said. And, it works with lawyers as well. Lawyers are definitely trained in law school to think in a certain way and to think within the bubble.
Yes.
And this is how these social systems are able to continue wreaking havoc, if you will, without consequences. one of our favorite examples, because of course we consider GMOs to be but one of what the president of our foundation, General Bert Stubblebine, has identified as the 5 big lies, what he calls the five genomicidal technologies. And they are, of course, they include GMOs, but they also are the drugs and vaccines, which we see in a similar light, what we call geoengineering or chemtrailing, and of course, anything having to do with radiation, and anything having to do with the way our food supply is being grown, which is separate from the genetic modification. In each of those cases, the toxins that are introduced, whether those toxins are the novel proteins that show up in the GMO organisms, or whether they are the ionizing radiation that comes out of Fukushima, or the substances in the chemtrails, or the toxins in the drugs and vaccines, they all damage the human body in a very similar way. They cause, of course, free radical cascades, causing damage on the cellular level, and damage that goes down so deep as to actually damage the genome itself, which is why General Burt calls those technologies genomicidal, and why Dr. Rima, in looking at those technologies and that process of free radical damage, has devised or identified what she calls the genome disruption syndrome, when the toxic buildup is so great, whether it's from the genetically modified food that people are eating, or from the toxins in the flu shots they're getting, or whatever it may be from, at some point the body is unable to repair the damage that's constantly being caused. And we have a genome disruption syndrome, which is expressed as such symptoms as infertility, premature aging, dementia, of course autism, autoimmune diseases, cancer, and the like. Indeed, the very preventable non-communicable diseases of malnutrition identified back in 2002 by the World Health Organization. And so it all comes in a circle, and we're circling around the problem, if you will. And the information that you're providing to us at this time is information that is extraordinary. When you think that just in the past few months, as you've told us, Dr. Swanson's studies or statistical analysis show that as the amount of Roundup is increased in a given area, the amount of chronic disease is increased. So it's not the GMOs themselves that are causing the damage, although Dr. Rima would argue that the novel proteins in the GMOs and the organisms themselves are bad. But what you're saying, it's actually the pesticides that are now building up, if you will, in the land that are linked in this particular study, because it looked at the level of pesticide use and the level of disease. The other mechanism that may be at work is the actual disruption of the genome through the novel proteins, as Dr. Rima says, novel proteins for which the human body has no genetic experience. Now, is that true? Do genetically modified organisms include not just distorted DNA or chimera DNA? Do they also include proteins that are not normally found in that species?
Yes.
That's
what I called earlier collateral damage.
Aha.
When you force.
Dr. Vrain? Once again, Dr. Vrain, we got a momentary disruption as you talk about the collateral damage. There we are. You're back on again. We just lost you.
You are basically putting those genes, those bacterial genes, under the regulatory activity of the genome of the plant, which is completely different. And there are definitely multiple proteins that are created that have no relation to what they should be or could be. We don't know what they are. I call them truncated protein. They're rogue proteins. We have known about these proteins for a long, long time. I've talked about it for quite a while. And the regulatory agencies and the biotech companies and the scientific community don't want to hear about it. And yet I am certain that...
there we go, Dr. Vrain. We're actually going into our break. I hope you can stay with us for at least part of the next hour. I'd love to continue this discussion.
There's no denying the world is Revolution Radio. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Good evening, folks. Good evening. Ralph Fusatola, JD, here, standing in for Dr. Rima Lebo on the Dr. Rima Truth Reports. It's a snowy evening here in northwest New Jersey. I have as my guest, however, a gentleman from the far west side of Canada, Dr. Thierry Vrain, who is a GMO scientist who has come over to the side of the angels and has been enlightening us greatly this evening. I'm about to bring us back to the program, but as you know, if you're a regular listener to the Dr. Rima Truth Reports, this is the time when we talk a little bit about the foundation, Natural Solutions Foundation, your sponsor of this program on Revolution Radio. And of course, we appreciate your support. General Burt and Dr. Rima founded the Natural Solutions Foundation back in 2004. This is our 10th anniversary year, 2014. We're very excited. We invite you to take a look at valleyofthemooncoffee.com. And you'll see a bit about our all-natural organic coffee finca in the highlands of Panama. We were there as recently as July of this past year. Have a nice video from that event. You can donate to the foundation, and we will be happy to send you some of our wonderful coffee. So go to valleyofthemooncoffee.com. It is actually magnificent coffee, and Dr. Rima says that truly toxin-free coffee is a health food. High antioxidant, very good health food. Well, this evening's guest is a major voice in warning the world about the unintended consequences of GMOs, genetically modified organisms, part of our concern about food and about health. So, Dr. Vrain, thank you for staying with us. As you know, Dr. Rima Lebo cannot be with us this evening because where she is right now has limited internet connection, but she sent us some questions, and we've been discussing her questions and learning a lot about the nature of GMO organisms. So we've gone through a couple of her questions. Here's the next one, and it is: do you worry about what your work has unleashed? The discussion we had earlier about collateral damage, about genetic drift. Do you worry about what your work has unleashed?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that question, but definitely doing what I'm doing, I'm very alarmed. I'm very concerned. Mm-hmm. And probably the reason why I'm on your show is because I've become a bit of a public figure recently in the last year or so, and I'm currently going on a tour of Canada. Mm-hmm. I just finished touring British Columbia and Alberta, and starting in 2014, I'm going to go across the rest of Canada, doing a multiple presentation in many, many towns, because I'm very concerned. Yes, I am a scientist, but I'm a human being. I'm a father and a grandfather, etc. And I really see that there is definitely something wrong. There are flaws in the technology, and that's what my presentation is about. I just expose all the flaws of the technology. I talk about how we are here in North America. We are in the in the biotech bubble. It's amazing. You look at a map of the world, and you can see that most of the rest of the world is regulating GMOs or banning them, or they want nothing to do with them, definitely not want to eat them. And there's a few countries, including all of North America, of course. In Canada, we're exactly in the same boat as in the USA, where there is absolutely no regulation, no labeling. and then you come across clues and evidence like those curves that I just told you about,
Yes.
those correlation curve. And this is like public statistics. It's available from the Center for Disease Control. You can go and check it out.
But the mass media does not emphasize those stories. It's only the media such as the internet media. So we're very appreciative that you're here to help us understand these things. When you're on your tour in Canada, for our Canadian listeners, is there a website they can go to find out where you're going to be speaking?
There is a website, and I don't.
Is it GMO? Is it the GMO awareness website? There's a website, GMO-awareness.com, that has a quote of yours. In fact, it's got your photo and the quote it has is, "I refute the claims of the biotechnology companies that their engineered crops yield more, that they require less pesticide applications, that they have no impact on the environment, that they are safe to eat. The scientific literature is full of studies showing that engineered corn and soya contain toxic or allergenic proteins." End quote. So hopefully the folks at GMO-awareness.com may be able to help us keep track of where you're going to be talking. I'm sure a lot of our listeners would like to hear more from you about these issues. And
you broke off again.
I did. All right. I just again suggesting that I read the quote that your quotation that GMO-awareness.com has, and I thought perhaps that website might offer some information. And certainly you ought to set up a Facebook page so we can all follow you and know where you're going to be.
I have a Facebook page.
All right, good.
You can always find me there, and you can Google my name, and I'm all over the place.
All over the place. That's right.
It's very interesting to be in the limelight.
We understand how that works. Dr. Rima and General Burt have been in the limelight for a number of years, from before they founded the foundation for Natural Solutions Foundation. Our foundation is quite intent on discovering, on developing, on documenting, on disseminating natural solutions to issues such as the one that you're concerned about. And so let us continue with Dr. Rima's questions. She has sent us questions from, you and I are 3,000 miles apart on opposite sides of North America. Dr. Rima is down not just in Santiago de Chile, where she lives, but is 12 hours south of there, rounding the edge towards Antarctica, I guess. And she sends us questions for tonight's program. So let's go on. Can GMOs be contained? Now that's an interesting practical question from a doctor who has worked with, of course, our organic coffee farm. But that's the question: can GMOs be contained? If so, how?
Can GMOs be contained? I will be very brief about that. I have an expression. I said the genie is out of the bottle.
Yeah.
And there is no recall. You cannot recall this kind of technology. It's definitely the gene construct that we've put in the plant are definitely contaminating the landscape. And you alluded to that problem with gene flow between farmers, because obviously the genes flow from one field to another and contaminate the farmers' fields, and that's what it is. It's a serious problem.
Well, let me say to you that we've been very concerned about that. Of course, when you add to the GMO issue of contaminating fields, the 900-pound gorilla in everybody's living room, namely Fukushima, you come to the conclusion that maybe the only way to grow food in the Northern Hemisphere is to grow it in well-sealed greenhouses with HEPA filters for the air. And indeed, there is there are people who are working in the area of naturoponics. Naturoponics.org, I believe. People who are working on bringing just such closed environmental systems into being, because they're so concerned over just those problems. And indeed, Dr. Rima and General Burt are in the deep, deep South for one major reason, and that was to help generate an organic food supply from the deep, deep South to the Northern Hemisphere in the wake of Fukushima. We are extremely concerned about that issue as well. And as I said before, we consider radiation and GMOs and similar problems to be essentially to be the genome disrupting technologies of, I guess, the 20th and the 21st century. It's interesting to note that all of those technologies tend to have special legal status when it comes to our right to redress in the court systems for the harms they cause. Specifically, nuclear power and vaccination, at least in the United States, are both uninsurable risks. No insurance company will write an insurance policy out to anybody involved in either of those two areas of technology. And if it were not for a very compliant U.S. Congress that passed special laws for those two industries, they would not exist, because the general rule is that a publicly traded company cannot invest investors' funds in uninsurable risks. So they wouldn't even exist. Same thing with GMOs. For a very long time, a very long period, in the first decade or so of the GMO revolution, courts in the United States especially were making all sorts of bizarre decisions protecting the proponents of this sort of agriculture. And it's only been in recent years that, with some cases involving organic farmers who did not want this DNA on their land, have there been any legal victories. Similarly, with drugs and other industrial toxins, some American courts have recently been listening to the bizarre argument that because the FDA has approved, or at least not disapproved, these various chemicals being used in drugs, vaccines, in farming, and elsewhere, that individuals no longer have a right to sue. These are deemed safe, and our state courts are not allowed to interfere with a federal decision. One would assume that something similar might happen in the Canadian system, although the Canadian provinces tend to have more authority than the American states in some areas. So we see this special legal status that these people have and these companies have as a real driving force behind making a bad situation worse. But let me go on with some more of Dr. Rima's questions. Now, here's an interesting one. We hear rumors, she says, that GMOs revert to normal plants, but I find that very hard to believe. Have you heard those rumors, and is there anything to them?
No, I haven't heard those rumors.
I can't imagine how
the only way that could happen, I mean, it's not impossible, but the only way that could happen is that if the advantage, the genetic advantage, the evolutionary advantage conferred by the genes did not exist.
Oh, and then there might be choice. Well, if there were, as there used to be, thousands of different varieties of corn being grown, and they stopped using the pesticides, yes, that would be an issue. That's very, very interesting. Dr. Vrain, are you back? I think we lost him again. As always, when we come to very hard issues, it seems that we have some difficulty keeping the communication lines open. But that's what Revolution Radio is all about, keeping communication lines open. That's what Natural Solutions Foundation is about, making sure we can communicate so we can find those natural solutions. What are the solutions to this issue? Let's see if Dr. Vrain is able to get back on with us, because I have a number of additional questions that Dr. Rima wrote down for us. Let's see. All right. There we go. You're back on. All right. Yes, I was saying that's interesting. You know, we had one meeting, well, I guess it was 2 years ago. Every January, we have what we call our War Council. General Burt convenes a War Council. Sometimes the three trustees of the foundation get together physically with people, and we broadcast the meeting. And sometimes we do it virtually. But we had one physical meeting 2 years ago. We had a number of very interesting guests. And at one point, we were being interfered with so badly that someone called and said, "Can you please stop the person near the mic who's making that hacking cough Well, there was nobody in the room near the mic making a hacking cough. I guess we were being told by someone that we were being hacked. That sometimes happens, and sometimes it's just a snowstorm. Maybe it's just a snowstorm tonight. But we've been looking at. I'm not sure. We've joked that we've spent all those years wanting the government to pay attention to what we're saying, and now they have this entire agency, the NSA, listening to everything we say and writing out reports. So I guess we should be happy, I suppose, on some level or other. Well, back to Dr. Rima's questions. Another question that she has here. Let me see. Is there any evidence for the rumors? Now, we just discussed those rumors. And I was saying, in fact, as we got cut off, I was saying to you, that's very interesting because what would have to happen is they would have to stop using the pesticides, and then we would see what happened to those plants. Back a generation ago, when there were 1,000 varieties of corn being grown in North America, it would become obvious very quickly if a particular change was beneficial or not to the species. But today we have monoculture and the risks that we discussed earlier in the program. In fact, I think it was July of 2011, General Burt issued a warning in which he said the potential for famine in North America is very real as long as we continue to rely on GMO monoculture. And I hope it turns out that he was not prescient in that analysis, but it's something that we've been warning people about for a while. So back to Dr. Rima's questions. It looks like she has one or two more. Let's see. All right. What hope can you offer us? That's a pretty broad question, but it is a Dr. Rima question, all right. What hope can you offer us? What can we do?
Okay, you have to start again.
All right. Dr. Rima's question, maybe her last question. I'm looking at the questions that she has here. Yeah, it looks like the last question she has for us is very straight. There's three more. Okay. I'm going to ask them in a different order. These three questions, and then we'll answer them in the reversed order. The first question, which I think should be answered last, is what hope can you offer us? The second question was, let's get to that one. Do you believe that there's a depopulation agenda? Now, Dr. Rima comes to the heart of the things here. And if so, are GMOs part of the plan? Now, leave that alone for a second. And then the last one is, just how bad are GMOs? Now, I read your quote that was on GMO-awareness.com, and you certainly seem to suggest they're pretty bad. Just how bad are they? Is Dr. Rima's question.
How bad are they? Well, I often tell people, okay, imagine you're in a grocery store and you look at the vegetable section and only the sweet corn is engineered. Mm-hmm. So the vegetables are not engineered. You look at the fruit and they're not engineered except for papaya from Hawaii.
Okay.
Then you look at the meat. At the meat section, all the animals we raise are raised in the barn and fed engineered grain sprayed with Roundup.
Yep.
And then you look at the dairy section and it's the same story again, sprayed with Roundup. And then you look at the rest of the store and basically everything in the store that is prepared, processed, junk food, canned, baked, it's
everywhere. Interesting. This is, of course, the real risk, isn't it?
What happens with those. So if you feed those lab rats the same kind of food that we have in the grocery store, they will become sick in a few months. And like I said, 3 months of the life of a rat is 10 years of a human being. So it's not like, if you eat what's in the store, you're going to get sick tomorrow. No. But obviously, some people are more sensitive than others because we are seeing all kinds of epidemics of very strange diseases that did not exist 20 years ago. I'm amazed. I look in the store now and it's gluten-free everywhere. Well, where did that come from? Well, the gluten-free everywhere. Well, this is weird.
Well, what's happened, of course, is that people are now becoming gluten intolerant.
Yep.
and that presumably is a reaction to these unusual proteins that are found in these genetically modified organisms.
We don't know. It's either those proteins, which are called collateral damage, or the herbicide Roundup, which is also has its own toxicity.
Isn't it actually made from Agent Orange, among other things?
No, that's a different product.
That's a different product.
This is a very interesting remark of yours, because the herbicide that has been used now for the last 18 years has been sprayed so much that the weeds have become resistant.
Right.
And the weeds have become resistant so much that now the industry, of course the industry knew that was going to happen, they have taken the last many years to create the next generation of crops that are now engineered to resist the herbicide 2,4-D. And 2,4-D was Agent Orange in Vietnam.
I see. So we're moving into the era of this genetically engineered, if you will, genetically engineered plants for genetically engineered poisons. Very, very frightening thoughts. Dr. Rima has suggested to us in the middle question of these last three, do you believe that there is a depopulation agenda? And if so, are GMOs a part of that plan? Now, that's listeners to the Dr. Rima Truth Reports will, of course, remember that we've had a number of discussions with a number of people on Dr. Rima's assertion that there is an effort on the part of certain circles to reduce the human population by whatever means necessary. How do you feel about that possibility and about the role that GMOs might play in that?
I don't really have an opinion on this particular topic. My personal belief here is that it's just the capitalist system. We have corporations. It's the bottom line. There's investors, and people want to make money. And if I'm a big corporation and I can sell you a product that will make me money, then that's what I do. And if I can get away with selling you something that is not quite safe, then that's fine. That's what the system is about.
So I guess in a sense, Occam's razor would favor greed over conspiracy in this case.
I definitely would go for greed over conspiracy. Yes.
Yes. All right. That's okay. We've have other evidence of intentions to limit the human population, and it's interesting. Would you be surprised if, as Dr. Rima has told us, that right now in North America, especially in Canada and the United States, only 1 out of every 7 women can become pregnant without medical intervention? I think we've lost Dr. Vrain again. Are you back on, Dr. Vrain? The point, what I was about to say was Dr. Rima says that only about 1 out of every 7 women in the United States and Canada, probably in Australia and New Zealand as well, can become pregnant without some medical intervention, which is an astounding change from, just a generation or so ago. And she thinks, of course, that genetically modified organisms and the poisons and proteins attendant thereupon may have a lot to do with that. Do any of Dr. Swanson's statistics suggest that there might be an impact on fertility? Dr. Vrain, are you with us? That's very interesting. We lost you. We lost you again on that one.
I don't think Dr. Swanson went to that. I don't remember seeing that in her paper, but I have seen many papers, many studies done out of Europe showing infertility in rats.
Right.
After one generation, after several generations.
So we wouldn't be surprised.
Whether it is because of the rats fed engineered grain, then of course you have to think of the herbicide again, the glyphosate, the active ingredient of the herbicide, which is toxic and is an endocrine disruptor.
Right. In fact, of course, as Dr. Rima has explained to us on a number of occasions, all drugs are disruptors of the endocrine systems and of enzymes specifically. and that's how they work, as she tells us. In fact, we had a very interesting discussion earlier this week. We took over a friend's radio program. We do our regular weekly program. You're on that today. But we also took over Larry B. Kraft's program on Micro Effect back on Saturday. And we spent 2 hours talking about the last decade, what we've experienced as the Natural Solutions Foundation, and what Dr. Rima has experienced. And she sees the medical effects of these technologies, of which GMOs are one, so obvious now, and she's becoming frustrated that the media are ignoring it to the extent that they are, and that leads us, of course, to her final question, which is, what hope can you offer us? You've become an activist. What is the hope?
I don't really have much expectation that much of anything is going to change. I don't see the political will. I see the corporations having so much power now at the political level that there's definitely nothing to be expected from that level. What I say to people, what I say on my speaking tour is that if there's any change, it's going to come from the street. It's going to come from you and me. So I tell people basically to organize politically at the local level.
Right.
I don't know how the system works in the USA, but in Canada, the municipal level have a lot of power, and they definitely have the power to pass resolutions and even laws to ban GMOs in the municipalities.
We talk a lot about
agenda.
We talk a lot about Agenda 21 and how it's being implemented on a local level. And the reality is, of course, that on a local level is exactly where decisions are made as to what is being grown and not grown. So you're absolutely correct about that, and a very powerful thing indeed. And I'm sorry I interrupted you. I apologize. Please go back to what you're saying.
That's okay.
All right.
Yeah, that's basically all I have to say. Also in Canada, what I'm doing is I'm also beginning a national petition for the Senate to investigate the Department of Health. Because in Canada we have a law. It's the Food and Drug Act, and it's a law. And and basically the Department of Health has broken the law because they are not.
Gee, the government doesn't obey its own laws. How novel.
The government does not obey its own laws.
Interesting. Yeah. Very good. Our experience has been that pushback works. That when people in mass push back, the political system has no choice but to respond. It doesn't like responding. But as in Chile last year, when a couple of million emails to the members of the Senate of the Chilean Republic stopped UPOV 91. As someone said, there were containers full of dollars shipped down to Chile from various crony corporations, but that wasn't enough to overcome an aroused public. And indeed, GMOs became an issue in the presidential election, and the winning candidate has had to promise that she will appoint a commission to study the whole issue of GMOs, and not simply to allow Chile to move into the GMO universe without a lot more consideration and thought. So that's a good example. We've also experienced the power of pushback in other places. We've generated millions of emails to the U.S. Congress and have gotten them to write a few protections into some laws that might otherwise not have existed. It's always a compromise, of course. You don't get what you want, but at least you get something. And we found that if we don't push back, nothing happens. But if we generate that, and we have a system to do that, we have on our website, we have a series of what we call action items. These are web forms that can be used to send email messages to decision makers, and that's where we generate that sort of flow. What the feedback we get from the legislators here in the U.S., and I suspect it works the same in Canada and in Chile and elsewhere, is that it's not so much, they know that they're going to get swamped once in a while by messages about an issue. But when those messages continue for a long period of time, when people don't just send a message once, but send it over and over and over again, that's when it begins to have an impact, because the legislators ask their staff, how are the emails running? That's the general phrase, at least from members of Congress in the U.S. How are they running? In other words, what topics are still getting public interest? And so we think that a carefully planned social media campaign coupled with an email campaign to decision makers can have a significant impact. It did in Chile. We think it actually stopped the 2009 swine flu pandemic. At least it didn't get it. It allowed it not to get any steam, because so many millions of people publicly decided they were not going to take the vaccine. But that's, I have no statistical study that can prove that. All I know is that when people push back by the millions, the political system has very little choice but to at least give us some of what we want. And it's in that area where we don't always get what we want, but we get at least enough to survive to the next battle. And now that you've joined the activists, you'll find out, Dr. Vrain, that sometimes we lose lots of battles, but that's never a reason not to keep on fighting. I wrote an essay recently about that. I realized that over the past 50 years, I've been on the losing side of almost every political issue I've been involved in. But that has never been a reason not to keep at it, because the truth will eventually win out. We talk a lot about the medical community. Dr. Rima likes to talk about those stories because she knows about them. About how the medical community, for example, for over a generation, rejected the idea of doctors washing their hands as having anything to do with disease, and in fact had hounded out a very intelligent doctor, had hounded it out of the practice because he insisted on hand washing. So it takes a long time sometimes for these institutions to come around and react to what we've learned. But what you've shown us is that what was a promise in the beginning, a promise of a miracle of food, of abundant food, of farmers not having to worry so much about weeds, for example, turned into a great risk. But you have led the way as a scientist in finding out about those risks. When people like you are talking about Dr. Swanson's study, for example, other scientists have to begin to think about it as well. And it's only through those changes. Maybe it'll take a generation for old science to adopt new ideas. And maybe we don't have that long because those diseases, those preventable, non-communicable diseases of malnutrition are coming at us more rapidly. But it's clear to me that when people like you are willing to go across all of Canada and tell people about this, that we can expect change. And it only is going to come from the professionals. The medical community is going to be changed because doctors are going to be finally sick and tired of what's going on. The agricultural science community is going to change because people like you are willing to speak up. And speaking truth to power is certainly one of the things that we have always encouraged. So we're really happy about that. We have about a half an hour left in our program this evening. Actually, a little less than a half an hour. And I'd love to have a further discussion with you if you can stay with us. I know it's eating into your evening, but I'm sure there's much more that we could learn from you about your experiences, maybe about how science is actually done. I mean, what is it physically that's done to bring that DNA into another species? That process is something that we might learn from. We'd also like to know more about how this genetic drift occurs, how these, you were talking in the very beginning, Dr. Vrain, about the bacteria and how it exchanges DNA. Isn't genetic drift that we've been talking about on and off an example of that happening with multicellular creatures?
No, multicellular creatures do sex.
All right, you said,
Remember?
and
I
yes,
know,
you
I
said
know.
the
I get in
audience
trouble
chuckles,
every time
and
I
here I
say the
am
word.
chuckling.
It's
All
a
right.
very simple three-letter word,
Yeah.
but it's a very important word. It's like plants and animals do not do, genetic engineering. That's it. It comes to that. It's called direct gene transfer. Bacteria do direct gene transfer, and we have taken a technology that works very well with bacteria, and we are applying it to plants, and we don't really know what we're doing.
Indeed.
It's that simple.
We know, you do as a scientist know precisely how to do it, but you don't know what the effects are going to be in the long run. Is that really what you're telling us?
That's what I'm telling you. Although we do know what's happening, but basically, again, in the biotech bubble, it's being ignored, and because of greed.
Yeah. Well, we saw that with the vaccines, for example, Gardasil, the perfect vaccination. It's going to prevent, presumably, a disease that will not occur for 40 years. And by the time the bad effects of the vaccine are noticed, maybe, all of those executives who made fortunes on that vaccine will be long retired. So you're right. It is on that level being driven by greed. It is. But tell me, I presume the scientists are not talking about greed openly. What is the language that your fellow scientists use? We used to use the phrase Aesopian language after Aesop.
This is a very interesting question.
Yeah.
There is an expression. It's called academic capitalism.
Yeah.
When I started my career 45 years ago, the expression was "publish or perish." You probably have heard that.
Oh yeah.
You're a young scientist. You're a graduate student. You're a young scientist, and this is the expression: publish or perish. You have to do good work. You have to do good research, and you have to publish it as much as you can into the best journals you can, and that's how you climb up the ladder. That's how you become famous.
Right.
And then until about 25, 30 years ago, you received funding from your university or you received funding from your government. And this is, I was working for the government. But something happened 25 years ago. Suddenly it became acceptable. And then within a few years, it became encouraged to get funds from industry, meaning the corporations.
Right.
Or meaning, maybe an association of growers, like, the potato growers wanted you to do some research on potatoes. And they said, look here, we have $20,000 if you want to do a research project on potatoes. That's how it happened. This is 25 years ago.
Right.
And then over the last 25 years, it became encouraged. It became even a good thing to have as much money as you could from industry. It's normal. It's called an industry university grant. It's perfect.
Right. And certainly on a certain level, we can understand that and want business entities to put money into that.
Capitalism, and now the new expression is patent and get rich.
Oh yes, we've seen that happening. Good example. Dr. Rima recently wrote a blog in which she castigated the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, a very prestigious institute, because one of the doctors there, Dr. Offutt, who is very well known in the on the internet as being a major opponent of, among other things, vaccines and vitamins, where he happens to sit on the CDC committee that approves vaccines. And he did not recuse himself when a vaccine in which not just the Children's Hospital had an interest, a patent interest, but he personally had a patent interest. So yes, we are very concerned with the ethical issues raised by crony corporatism. I guess that's the phrase that I would use to describe the process. And we've always seen it. We've seen it happening for many years, where individuals go from academic positions to government positions to industry positions in a circle. And in the United States, the art of crony corporatism has become, the great political art of the 20th and 21st century. Doesn't matter which party is in power. Monsanto some Monsanto employee ends up controlling FDA food safety. Doesn't matter if it's the neocons on the right like Bush or the neocons on the left like Obama. The same people end up in charge. Goldman Sachs runs Treasury and Monsanto runs FDA, and it seems almost like a corporate takeover of the federal bureaucracy is going on. And I suspect that the national bureaucracy in Canada is not much different at this point.
It's very interesting. If you think about it, when I was younger, I would hear stories of the big corporations going into the third world country, and you bribe the minister or you bribe whoever, and then you get your way. And I think the USA and Canada have become third world countries.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, and of course it's money that determines policy. That would seem to be what's going on. That's the only explanation we can get that I can give for things like the laws that were adopted taking away our right to redress for the harms that these companies put into commerce. As a pro-capitalist, pro-free market libertarian, I'm very much opposed to anyone thinking that they can put something into commerce and not be responsible for the results of what they put into commerce. It's not buyer beware; it is seller be responsible. And I cannot understand how the legal system has gotten so far away from basic principles of justice that we have a situation where, for example, the vaccine companies are immune from paying for the damages they cause. And in fact, the victims pay. In the United States, there's a special tax on every single dose of vitamins. And that tax is used to fund a special fund that pays, as we say, the tip of the iceberg of the damages and the harms that vaccines cause. And in some sense, every single person on this planet is harmed by the vaccinations they received. In some very real sense, every single person on the planet is harmed by GMOs. But that harm can never be redressed because the crony corporations have gotten themselves in a special legal status that allows them to get away with what private individuals could never get away with. In that sense, they have become a little like the government. Government being the only institution in society that claims the right to get away with that which nobody else could get away with. And so we see the process, the corruption, if you will. And that's almost what I was getting at a little earlier about the language that might be used. Aesop created fables. Aesopian language is a language that's built around fables. It's built around misdirection and labeling things what they're not. And I'm sure that just as in the legal profession, I saw a lot of that sort of language obscurating what's really going on. There must be that sort of thing going on among genetic scientists as well. In this era when genetic science has become such a major science, do people in your field ever discuss the ethics of this? I know there are ethics committees and there are ethics proclamations. Gosh, in the medical world, there's the famous Helsinki Declaration, which the United States does its best to ignore. What about in the science of genetic modification?
No, not with plants. No, there's no. I don't think there's any need for any ethics. You're working with plants, but everything is allowed. And I don't remember any consideration of any kind of ethical issues. Particularly, you referred it yourself 25, 30 years ago when we started with the technology. It was a green technology. It was, we were just going to do miracles. We were going to do wonderful things. It was.
It was called the Green Revolution, and GMOs were really only a small part of it. Wasn't that true? Or weren't there other aspects? There were hybrids. Wasn't it true that the Green Revolution really started with hybrid technology?
No, the Green Revolution started in the 60s.
Yes.
And the hybrid technology came just about the same time, but I wouldn't say that the hybrid technology started the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution was basically a way to designed to create new varieties of crops that could grow, that could yield more if you gave them more fertilizer. That's what the Green Revolution is about. So if you've invented a new variety of potatoes and you can double the amount of fertilizer and you get double the yield. That's wonderful.
Yes, and it did, in fact, it does seem to have stopped famine in India and China and elsewhere, except where there are political situations that create famine.
Yes, it did. Indeed, it did. And of course, again, like we said, we talked about greed and about profit. If you need more fertilizer, you get more food, but you need more fertilizer, therefore that's more money for the corporation.
Right.
If you increase the amount of fertilizer,
and indeed, if you increase the amount of fertilizer, Dr. Vrain was saying, you're going to increase the cost to the farmers.
You're basically increasing the epidemics of bad bacteria and fungi and fungal diseases.
Well, and that's what happened to that farm, to our coffee farm. That's precisely what was happening to the coffee farm. And Dr. Rima said we can remediate this. So her question about is there hope? The land can be remediated. Some of those poisons, though, will make it hard. We were successful with our land because for 4 years it had been abandoned. And no one had put any pesticides or fungicides or anything on it. But how many years will it take for Roundup to decay in the soil to the point where that land will no longer be poisoned?
Not that long. It's not a question of Roundup. It's a question of bringing back the biodiversity in the soil. And that basically what you're discussing here is basically what the organic farmers are doing.
Right.
If you're a conventional farmer and you decide you want to go organic, you need to tend the land for 3 years before you can be called organic.
Right.
That's the estimate of the time it takes for the soil to come back to normal.
Even with heavy usage of things like Roundup before. I mean, this is an important issue. You've just given us an answer to the question of hope, because we've always been very concerned about it taking many years for such things to break down. So please spend a little time. We have about 6 minutes left in the program. This is a really important issue. A lot of the people who listen to our program are interested in their home gardens and in that sort of thing. So tell us, what is the likelihood that if people got religion tomorrow and stopped using any of these pesticides, how long would it take for the land to recover? That's a very good question. And it looks as though our connection with Dr. Vrain has gotten...
Broke up. I didn't hear you.
Okay. I'm saying you've actually given us hope.
Hello?
Yes, can you hear me, Dr. Vrain? Oh, I'm sorry to say, I don't think you can hear me. Let me type him a note. I can hear you. All right. I can hear you. All right. And I'll say thank you. Thank you, Dr. Vrain.
Okay.
There you go. Now you're back on. I was saying you've given us hope. You've just told us something that I certainly did not expect. From everything I've been hearing, I assumed that Roundup and some of these other chemicals being used would take many, many years to break down. But what you've just said to us is 3 years. And that's a fact that is really important for us to understand. That means there is hope. And hope is something that we've all been very interested in achieving. Dr. Rima's question, her last question, of course, of the evening, is the question that raises the central issue. Can we do with the cornfields of North America, of the American Midwest and of Canada, of the Great Plains, what was done with our little coffee farm down in Panama? Can the land be remediated? These are important issues. And when you bring into the discussion, ladies and gentlemen, that 900-pound gorilla that is in everyone's living room, as we say, Fukushima. When you bring that into the discussion, you realize that hope is something we absolutely need. This is the 10th anniversary year of the Natural Solutions Foundation. It is the year that we hope to bring some of these issues to the fore. General Burt and Dr. Rima and I, your host this evening, Ralph Fusatola, JD, are planning an interesting year to celebrate our 10th anniversary. We're going to have a series of webinars. In past years, we've held a war council at the beginning of the year. I think this year we're going to hold a series of webinars throughout the year to celebrate our first decade. What we've learned tonight from Dr. Vrain, who is an agricultural scientist who worked in the field of genetically modified organisms in his career and has since his retirement come out to speak truth to power, is that the risks are greater than we thought and that there is hope. Certainly, I didn't expect to hear that it might only take a few years for land to recover from these poisons that are being used in the monoculture that has taken over great swaths of North America, United States, and Canada. Well, we're just, I'm sorry that it doesn't seem to be that we can get Dr. Vrain back on. So I'm going to just thank him and thank you all for listening. Now, next week, Dr. Rima will be back. She'll be back with some stories of the Deep South. I don't know if she got to see any glaciers down there or not. I don't know how close she was to the southern terminus of South America, 12 hours south of Santiago is pretty far south. But she'll be back this coming week. We'll have some an interesting guest as always. And we appreciate all of your continued patronage of Natural Solutions Foundation. I am still blown away by some of the information that Dr. Vrain gave us this evening. We are very grateful to him and hope that he continues to speak truth to power. That is certainly why we are here. And let us repeat his public statement. As he said, he's become an activist. He says, I refute the claims of the biotechnology companies that their engineered crops yield more, that they require less pesticide applications, that they have no impact on the environment, and that they are safe to eat. The scientific literature is full of studies showing that engineered corn and soya contain toxic or allergenic proteins. That is a very powerful statement. He pointed out the recent studies by Dr. Swanson that show that as the pesticide use has increased, the chronic disease has increased. Direct statistical results, and that's separate from the harmful effects of the GMO novel proteins. So GMOs can harm us in two ways. They allow farmers to use much higher levels of pesticide. That is the GMO modification, as Dr. Vrain explained to us initially. One modification only. It simply allows the plants to survive massive amounts of pesticides. So that's the first thing. More pesticides are used, more pesticide residuals, more pesticides get into the water supply. It's that danger. But also, the GMOs themselves contain toxic or allergenic proteins, the novel proteins that Dr. Rima has spoken about. So that's another confirmation from this scientist, this research scientist for Agriculture Canada, who has been our guest this evening on the Dr. Rima Truth Reports. Thank you all, and many blessings for the new year.